This time, we're going to talk about the setting of Perfidious Tides, and in turn, the other two novels, Last Castle in the Sky and Live the Last Day. Perfidious Tides is mostly set in the western Florida Panhandle. Panama City Beach, little towns like Vernon, Bonifay, New Hope, Esto, all those little towns that you go through on your way to the beaches of Northwest Florida, especially Panama City Beach, Florida Highway 79. As a child, that is the direction that we went when we traveled down to the beaches. I know most people, when they go to Panama City from other places, they go down US Highway 231 down through Dothan, and there's not a whole lot there. You go through Campbellton, Cottondale, some other little towns, a few red lights, and you come into Panama City proper across the Hathaway Bridge. But if you go down Highway 79, you come across the Alabama-Florida line right in the tiny town of Esto, Florida. It's a little bit different. It was a little bit different back in the early 80s when I was growing up. When I write about the Panhandle of that time, it's that we know that Perfidious Tides starts out around 1968, 1969 in that time frame. And I write about how Panama City looks in that era, but I'm writing it as I saw it in the early 80s, mid 80s. I know it had probably changed a lot from the early 70s to the early 80s, that decade, but when I write it, that's what I'm seeing, because that's what I saw. Now, I grew up 50 miles from the Florida line, and going down to Florida was no big deal. I mean, going down to Panama City was a regular occurrence, Panama City Beach. And when you cross the Florida line, coming out of Geneva County, Alabama, and I think Holmes County, Florida, not a whole lot of difference. You really wouldn't know that you crossed the line unless there was a sign there, especially on that back road going from Slocomb, Alabama down to Chipley into Graceville and down that area. I mean, you cross the line down there, and I don't even remember a sign down that way, but it's not a whole lot different than South Alabama. And growing up, we'd go down there and we'd buy calves. There used to be a lot of dairy farms in the Florida Panhandle, and we'd go down there and buy dairy calves and raise them by a bottle. I don't know that there's any dairy farms left in the Florida Panhandle now, or in South Alabama. I know of one, but I think they've diversified so much they don't really consider themselves just a dairy farm anymore. But getting back to the setting of the book, when I wrote the regional opening where we find Rolf, frolicking on the beach with his little girlfriend of a day from, I think it was North Carolina. The way I described the beach is what I saw as a child. Old wooden piers. And I'm talking old decrepit piers. Not really decrepit, but I was terrified to go out on them when I was a child. There was several scattered around from my memory around the beach back then. But you could just pull up right beside it, park right beside it, and you go out on the pier. There was no charge. It was free. It's not like today with Pier Park where you go and there's this big entertainment shopping complex and you got a pier right across the road that you got to pay to go on. That wasn't old Florida. That wasn't old Panama City Beach. Yeah, I wrote about Rolf working in the ice cream cone. And I can remember that as a child, there being It was shaped like an ice cream cone. And you could buy ice cream there. In my mind, I see it right next to a pier. It may not have been. I think there were a couple scattered up and down the strip right there in Panama City. I'm not certain. But for a while after I wrote that, I was asking myself, was that real? Did I dream that? And then I gave a very early draft of Perfidious Tides to a friend to read. And he had spent some time down there as a child. He lived there for a little while. And he remembered those ice cream cones. So that wasn't a figment of my imagination. That was real. Dunes were different back then. It just seemed like everything was different in my mind. I guess it was bigger because I was a child. But it's like you could ride down the strip and you could see the ocean. You could see the white sand of the beaches back then. You can't really do that anymore. There's not very many places where you can ride along and just see the water. It's all covered with condos and businesses. And it's just, to lack for a better term, it's not the same. And that's the era that when I wrote Perfidious Tides, I was thinking about. All those old mom and pop, hotels down there, motels mostly. Like the Sundial, the Beachcomber, the Sea Witch, the Barney Gray, the Beachside Hotel. There were different sections of Panama City. Like you had Long Beach, you had Laguna Beach. And the place where you come down through the Panhandle on 79, you came out, it was called the Y because it was a literal Y. You could either go right on the strip or left on the strip. And there's a little bit of area in between them, and it really came out to a Y. And I haven't been to Panama City in a long while, Panama City Beach, and I've been told they put a roundabout in right there. That's like sacrilege to people who grew up around here and grew up going down to Panama City Beach. The Y was special. Now it's gone. I guess it's been gone for a while, but I remember as a child, as we would drive from southern Alabama and crossing the Florida Panhandle, like I said, it wasn't that much different until you got a little past the little tiny community of New Hope. And it was started long. There was nothing but pine trees. Pine trees are everywhere. Pine trees on the left, pine trees on the right. There was Pine Log State Forest, which is still there. But for miles and miles and miles, there was nothing but pine trees. As a child, I called it the long stretch of pines. And that area right there around New Hope and a little bit to the north, Vernon and Bonifay is the area where Vernon and Rolfe grew up. Because it's not a long drive. It's about 50 miles from Bonifay down to the coast, down to the Gulf. And that's an area that just feels like home sometimes when you ride down through there. And that's where I wanted this family to originate, right there in that area. Far enough away from the beach where it's country. There's farms, there's small businesses, there's little towns, especially back then. To me, Vernon is pretty much, Vernon and Bonifay, zero in a little bit. It's pretty much where the brothers grew up. I don't remember mentioning it by name in the book, but I kind of hinted around at it. Especially in Last Castle, when Vern is having that flashback. No, spoilers ahead. Is having that flashback while he's in prison and thinking about going fishing with his father in Holmes Creek and fishing for suckers. Now, not a whole lot of people fish for suckers. It's a really bony fish. It's not really good to eat. But my uncle would go down there all the time. He loved to fish for those suckers because they pulled so hard. And he would fish Holmes Creek. And he would bait up sucker holes. And I put that in the book because that's a childhood memory that will stick with you. And as Vernon is in his predicament that we see, I wanted Holmes Creek to figure in, and they've replaced the bridge over Holmes Creek right there going into Vernon with a modern concrete bridge. And I remember for years and years coming into Vernon, it was a long, old style concrete bridge. It didn't have the solid guardrails. It had the broken guardrails. And you could see Holmes Creek down below you, and it's gone. They 4-laned Highway 79 all the way from Bonifay down to the coast, except for one little spot. And they've destroyed the town of Vernon to me. I don't know how the people that live there feel, but it's not the same going through there. It doesn't have the same vibe. It's like they sucked the energy out of the little town. Bonifay's still going strong. They didn't cut a 4-lane through the town of Bonifay because it started right there at I-10, where I-10 crosses. And speaking of I-10, I wanted I-10 in the book to be fresh and to be new, because in that time frame it was. And I went back and looked it up to make sure it was fairly new, because I-10 is the main corridor that connects Jacksonville, Florida to Los Angeles, California. And it starts right there on the Atlantic coast, and it cuts right through the Panhandle. It is the closest interstate to my home, Highway 10. And I wanted it to play a little bit of a role. And Tallahassee, and I didn't mention Florida State University by name, but one of the incidents, the Night of the Bayonets, is featured in Perfidious Tides. That was a real occurrence, and it happened at Florida State. And I did a little research on it. There's one book that I read that was connected to it, that was told from the perspective of the Florida State president at that time. But the Panhandle plays a big part in these books, because the Panhandle was a big part of my childhood. And before I get to another, I wanted to talk about the little bar right there that Pops, Burns, and Ross's father, frequented. I had one place in mind. It's right there on Highway 79. And I think it's before you get into Bonifay. It's a little bar right there on the left. I'm not going to call its name, but it's a little bar in the middle of nowhere. And there's hardly any cars there during the day, but at night it kind of lights up a little bit. And it's not far from that, there's a giant cross that somebody has put up beside the highway. And I thought that was like the dueling forces, that we see in good versus evil and all that good stuff. You got this bar right here, then right up the road, you got that giant cross on the other side of the road. But that bar is, if you ever go down Highway 79 coming into Bonifay, and on the left, there's a bar right there. It's a white building, nondescript building. That is the bar that I had in mind when I wrote the bar scenes with Pops sitting there watching the Atlanta Braves. And if you haven't noticed, if you've read the books, you notice that the Atlanta Braves in baseball, it takes kind of a side story or a backstory into the books. I did that on purpose because I'm a lifelong Atlanta Braves fan, suffered through the 80s. But baseball to me is special. It's a game that my father loved, and that I guess he passed that down to me. And I wanted to feature the Braves in my work, and I did several times. I know in Perfidious Tides, spoilers, Pops passes away watching the Atlanta Braves lose. And then later on, we see some of the side characters, or not really side characters, but people like Mateo finds, wearing a Braves cap that he bought, not really knowing what it is. And then, big spoilers here, And the very last part of Last Castle, when we finally had the two brothers meet again and kind of lock horns, where's it at? It's at, in my mind, I didn't name it, but it's old Fulton County Stadium. I may have named it. I can't remember, a lot of times I'm getting older. That was old Fulton County Stadium. And a lot of Vern's memories about Fulton County Stadium and about Atlanta are my memories as a child. And here we're kind of veering off a little bit from the Panhandle, but I remember being in awe of Atlanta. I mean, came from a town, a community of 50 people, and driving into Atlanta for the first time to see the Atlanta Braves play the New York Mets. This was 1980, maybe 81, 82, somewhere along there. And I remember the buildings just had me like awestruck. The stadium, when it first appeared, old Fulton County Stadium, those gray angled columns or wide angled columns, I am colorblind, and that roof leaning over the stadium and how big it was. And it just struck me, and it stayed with me. That vision of first seeing Fulton County Stadium, to going to my first Major League Baseball game, has stuck with me through all these years. But that was where I wanted everything to kind of come to a head there in the second book. And West Palm also played a big part in Perfidious Tides and Last Castle. It doesn't a whole lot in Live the Last Day because we've kind of moved the story back to its origin. But West Palm, I don't know a whole lot about. I've got a friend that grew up there, and I was kind of picking his brain about some of the areas of West Palm as I was writing a lot of the West Palm scenes. I wanted them to be as authentic as possible. And one of the main things I wanted to kind of contrast was, that's two different parts of Florida that couldn't be any more different. Especially the sand really represents a difference. The Atlantic coast sand of Florida is not like our sand of the Florida Panhandle, Northwest Florida beaches. The Northwest Florida has a white sand that squeaks under your feet, and I always wondered when you saw people driving in movies and on the Atlantic coast driving onto the beach, I was like, how is that possible? Because you sink into the Northwest Florida Panhandle sand. You sink down into it when you walk, and when you see four-wheelers coming down it or cars, they leave big ruts as they come down through there. So there's a lot of contrast in the book that kind of show the difference between the areas. And that was one of the major ones. I really wanted to focus on that sand in the Panhandle because it's a major character as much as anything else. How it just kind of mesmerizes you as you're sitting there, especially on a calm day on the Gulf, and that emerald green water just kind of, had the slight waves in it. You look out and that white sand stretches for as far as you can see, especially back then. There was no really landscapes other than small houses, small hotels. But I just wanted to talk a little bit today about the settings and how they come to be. And it's hard to keep everything into 20 minutes. So we'll revisit this as we go through the books. But I appreciate you listening. Number one, the views and the listens I have on Spotify and all that kind of blow me away sometimes because like I said, I didn't figure anybody won't listen to it. And apparently there's a few people out there that do. And I'm going to keep writing. Like I said, I've been thinking about coming our way here lately, and that book's really personal, so I'm taking my time with it. And I'll also be in Opelika at the end of the month. I think it is February 27th. Let me check my calendar. Actually, it'll be the last day of the month, the 28th. I'll be in Opelika for the Opelika Book Festival. And I'll have a lot of copies of Perfidious Tides, a few copies of Last Castle. So if you'd like to come get a signed copy of it and talk about the books, I'll be glad to talk with you about them. And as always, any questions, just let me know. And I'll see you next time.